So in this video we'll take a look at a very useful ratio known as the price to book ratio. In short, what we're trying to achieve here is we're looking for a way to decide whether a share is cheap or expensive, and this time we want to do it by comparing the current share price, what we might be prepared to pay to buy the share in the open market, to what's called the book value of a firm's assets. And we're going to use that comparison to work out whether the share is good value or frankly looks overpriced. So what is this thing, the price to book ratio? How does it work? Well, in simple terms, the way you would calculate it is you would take the current share price, that's the one that's available every day from a Bloomberg terminal or perhaps the FT, and you'd compare that to something called the book value per share. And the answer will be a number, it'll be a multiple. So this will be some multiple of that, let's say. So what are we looking at here? Well, the current share price, that's easy enough, we can look that up fairly quickly, it'll change every day. The book value per share is saying, let's take a look at what the company owns in terms of its assets. There are things called balance sheets companies produce. They are simply a list of what the company owns, what it owes other people, and a net total. So a bit like me looking at my house. Maybe it's worth £200,000, that's an asset, I own that, except that I don't own all of it because I've got a mortgage. And the mortgage is maybe £50,000, so my problem is that actually if you take the asset and deduct the mortgage, my net ownership is only £150,000. So companies do a similar thing. They list their assets, take away what are called their liabilities, and the result is a net position or a net asset position. And that's going to be very useful for this part of the calculation. Okay, so how does this work? Well, what I could do is I can actually ask this question for Tesco. Let's worry about the bottom half of the formula first of all. What is the book value per share? What does that mean? Well, it suggests I need to know how many shares there are, for starters, how many shares has Tesco issued, and I need some sort of balance sheet total for Tesco's assets minus its liabilities. In the case of Tesco, that's not a house minus a mortgage, that's more like stores and any debt that finances them, for example. So, if I were to look up from the last set of accounts Tesco's book value and then divide by the number of shares it's issued, and those are pieces of information you can gather fairly easily from a website such as Digital Look or the FT.com, I should be able to come up with something called a book value per share. And in fact I can. So for example, in Tesco's latest accounts, in millions, the book value, so I could call that the BV of Tesco's assets, this is in millions, is 14,681. And in terms of number of shares issued, again, all expressed in millions. Just to keep it tidy, I've shortened the number a little bit. Number of shares issued is, on the latest count, 7,985. So, a little sort of back of an envelope calculation there suggests that if I take the book value of all of Tesco's assets, divide by the number of shares it's issued, the book value attached to every share is around £1.84. What does that mean? It means that for every share out there, Tesco has roughly £1.84 worth of assets, stores, and so on. So far, so what? Well, price to book suggests that that's not enough. That's only half the equation. What I want to do is compare that £1.84 to the current share price. So, taking away some of this, I could look up Tesco's current share price And at the moment, that's around, let's say, £4.30. The book value per share we just crunched and decided was £1.84. This is data that you could look up in practice, but worth knowing roughly where it comes from. So comparing the current share price to the book value per share gives me this thing, a so-called price to book ratio. And that comes out at the moment at around 2.34 times. In other words, that is simply 2.34 times that. Okay, so imagine I'm handed that on a plate. So imagine I look that up, someone says the Tesco price to book value ratio is 2.34. Two questions. Is that good or bad? And actually, should I even be using it for Tesco at all? Okay, is it good or bad? Like all ratios, what you want to be thinking is a couple of things. Maybe I should compare Tesco to other retailers. I could maybe compare it to the wider market. But also you can ask another question with this ratio. There is a rule of thumb that says when the price to book ratio is well above 1, you're paying a lot for the shares. And that's because the current share price is over twice what apparently Tesco's assets are actually worth. So there's got to be another good reason to buy Tesco. That wouldn't be enough by itself. And equally, if the price to book ratio is less than 1, so if I redid the numbers and the answer I got here wasn't 2.34 in the case of Tesco, but for another company, imagine the answer came out at, let's say, 0.8. Fans of this ratio say, great, bargain. Because at 0.8, it suggests that actually you're getting a bit of a bargain by buying the shares. In other words, you are potentially buying the assets of the company by paying for its shares for less than they're worth. And if that's actually true, why wouldn't you buy the shares? So the price to book ratio, there is a rule of thumb on it. Less than 1, good start. More than 1, and certainly more than 2, you need to be a little bit careful. Maybe you are going to pay too much for the shares, or maybe you're using the wrong ratio altogether. So, what do I mean by that? What I mean is something called the price to book ratio, based on the assets that a company actually owns, is going to be most useful where assets are the key driver for an investor. In other words, the company's assets are what you would base a decision to buy the shares on, not its earnings or its cash flow or its dividends. Those use other ratios. So actually, as a rule of thumb, this thing, price to book ratio, is most useful in asset intensive sectors. So you might throw in investment trusts, a money week favourite. You very often hear the phrase, the investment trust, that's a firm that buys shares in other firms on your behalf, is trading at a discount or premium to its net asset value. Discount, this is less than 1, premium, more than 1. So investment trust companies are often a good place to use the price to book ratio, and heavily asset intensive businesses, perhaps utilities for example, are another. A company like Tesco, quite useful, but by itself not the only ratio that I'd look at. I wouldn't personally draw any conclusions about Tesco just off the back of a price to book ratio.